No one expected Karen to come back. Not after what happened last time. Not after the chaos, the shouting, and the moment that turned an ordinary school bus into a place of fear. But on that quiet morning, something felt different. Something felt wrong again. The yellow bus moved slowly down the familiar street, stopping at the same corners, picking up the same children, following the same routine. Parents waved goodbye, kids laughed, and the driver kept his steady focus on the road ahead. Everything looked normal on the outside. But inside, there was tension in the air. Some of the older students whispered quietly to each other. They remembered the last incident clearly. The arguments, the screaming, the way Karen had stood in the middle of the aisle, refusing to move. That day had stayed in their minds longer than anyone expected. The driver tried to keep his thoughts calm. He had been driving this route for years. He knew every stop, every turn, every house. Yet today, there was a strange feeling sitting heavily in his chest, like a warning he couldn't explain. At the next stop, the bus doors opened with a sharp hiss. And then she stepped in. Karen. For a moment, the entire bus fell silent. The children stopped talking. The driver froze, his hands tightening around the steering wheel. Even the sound of the engine seemed to grow quieter as she slowly walked up the steps. Her expression was serious, her eyes scanning the bus like she was searching for someone. She didn't greet anyone. She didn't smile. She simply stood there, holding the metal rail, as if she owned the space. "I need to talk to someone," she said firmly. Her voice echoed through the bus, calm but demanding. The driver took a deep breath and asked her to take a seat or step off so the bus could continue. But Karen didn't move. Instead, she walked down the aisle slowly, her eyes locked on the back row. The same back row where the last incident had begun. A few children shifted nervously in their seats. Some turned to look, others stared straight ahead, hoping to avoid attention. The tension inside the bus grew stronger with every step she took. This wasn't just a return. This was the beginning of something bigger. Something final. Karen moved slowly down the aisle, her footsteps steady and confident. Every child watched her, some with curiosity, others with fear. The memory of her last outburst still lived in their minds, and no one knew what she was planning this time. The driver kept his eyes on the mirror, carefully observing her movements. He didn't want to create panic, but he also couldn't ignore the tension growing inside the bus. This was supposed to be a normal morning. Children were supposed to laugh, talk, and prepare for school. Instead, silence filled the space. Karen stopped near the middle row and looked around, as if searching for a specific face. A young boy quickly turned his head toward the window, pretending not to notice her. A girl held her backpack tightly, her fingers pressing into the fabric. "Who was responsible for what happened last time?" Karen asked loudly, her voice cut through the quiet like a sharp blade. No one answered. The driver finally spoke, keeping his tone calm and controlled. He reminded her that the children needed to reach school safely and that she should speak outside if she had a concern. But Karen ignored him. She continued walking toward the back of the bus. The last row. The place where everything had started before. She stopped there and looked at the empty seat for a moment. Her face showed anger, but also something else. Something deeper. Maybe frustration. Maybe hurt. "I know someone here remembers," she said, turning slowly to face the students. A few children shifted nervously. One small voice from the front whispered to a friend, asking why she had come back again. No one wanted trouble. They only wanted to reach school safely. The driver could feel the situation slipping out of control. He knew he had to act carefully. He pulled the bus to the side of the road, the tires making a soft sound against the pavement. The engine continued running as he stood up from his seat. "Ma'am, we need to talk outside," he said firmly but respectfully. For a moment, Karen didn't move. Then she slowly turned toward him. Her expression was intense, and it was clear this time, she wasn't leaving without answers. The bus stood silent at the side of the road, engine humming softly as if it too sensed the growing tension. Children sat frozen in their seats, unsure whether to speak or stay quiet. No one wanted to make the situation worse. All eyes were now fixed on Karen and the driver. The driver stepped into the aisle slowly, trying to stay calm. He had dealt with difficult situations before, but this felt different. Karen's return wasn't just about anger. There was something deeper behind her presence, something that refused to settle. "Please step outside," he repeated, keeping his voice steady. "We can talk without scaring the children." Karen looked around the bus again. The students' nervous faces, the quiet fear in their eyes, and the silence surrounding her seemed to finally reach her. For a moment, she hesitated. Then she turned and walked toward the door. As she stepped down, the driver followed, leaving the bus door open. Fresh morning air rushed inside, and the children slowly began whispering again, trying to understand what was happening. Outside, Karen crossed her arms and stood near the front of the bus. The driver faced her, keeping a safe distance. "You can't just come here and stop the bus like this," he said calmly. "The children need to reach school safely." Karen's eyes filled with emotion, but her voice remained strong. "You don't understand," she said. "Something happened here last time. And no one listened to me." The driver stayed quiet, letting her speak. "My son used to sit on this bus," she continued. "Right there, in the back row. That day, he came home upset. He said something happened, but he was too scared to explain. And then, he refused to get back on the bus." Her voice trembled slightly. "I came back because I need answers," she said. "I'm not here to fight. I'm here to find out the truth." The driver felt the tension inside him ease just a little. This wasn't about control or anger. This was about a worried mother searching for understanding. Inside the bus, a boy sitting near the back slowly stood up. He looked toward the open door, listening to every word. And for the first time, it seemed like someone might finally speak. Inside the bus, the silence felt heavier than before. The children had heard every word Karen spoke outside. Some looked at each other nervously, while others kept their eyes down, unsure of what to do. The story about her son began to make sense, but no one knew who should speak first. Near the back row, a boy slowly stood up from his seat. His hands were shaking slightly as he held onto the top of the seat in front of him. He had been quiet since Karen stepped on the bus, but now his heart was beating fast. He remembered that day clearly. He walked carefully down the aisle and stopped near the open door. The driver noticed him first and stepped aside. Karen turned when she heard movement and saw the boy standing there. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "I think I know what happened," the boy said softly. Karen's eyes widened. She stepped closer but kept her distance, not wanting to scare him. The driver stayed near the door, ready to help if needed, but allowing the boy space to speak. "That day, your son was sitting in the back with us," he continued. "Some older kids were being loud. They were joking, but it got too rough. One of them grabbed his bag and wouldn't give it back." Karen's face tightened as she listened. "He didn't fight back," the boy said. "He just stayed quiet. I think he got really scared. When the bus stopped, he ran off fast. I wanted to tell someone, but I didn't know how." The driver looked shocked. He hadn't known anything about this. Karen closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. It hurt to hear, but she needed the truth. When she opened her eyes again, they were filled with emotion, not anger. "Thank you for telling me," she said gently. The boy nodded, still nervous, but relieved that he had finally spoken. Inside the bus, a few other students began whispering. One girl raised her hand slowly and added that she had seen it too but had been too afraid to say anything. Another child nodded in agreement. The truth was finally coming out. It wasn't one big incident. It was small moments no one reported. Moments that changed everything. The morning air felt different now. What began with tension and fear was slowly turning into understanding. Karen stood quietly near the bus door, listening as more voices began to rise from inside. The silence that once protected the truth was finally breaking apart. Another student stepped forward from the middle row. She looked nervous but determined. She explained how the older boys used to sit at the back, laughing loudly and sometimes teasing the younger children. Most days, it seemed harmless. But sometimes, it went too far. "They took his lunch once," she said softly. "And they kept calling him names. He didn't say anything. He just stayed quiet." Karen lowered her head, her hands trembling slightly. Every word felt like a piece of a story she had never fully heard before. She had known her son was upset. She had seen the fear in his eyes. But she never knew what had really happened on that bus. The driver felt a deep sense of regret. He had been focused on the road, making sure every child reached school safely. But he realized now that safety meant more than just driving carefully. It also meant watching, listening, and noticing what was happening behind him. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" he asked gently. The students looked at one another. One boy finally spoke. "We thought it wasn't a big deal," he said. "And the older kids told us not to say anything." Karen took a deep breath and looked at the driver. There was pain in her eyes, but also understanding. She knew the children weren't trying to hide the truth. They were just scared, unsure, and too young to know how to speak up. "Thank you for being honest," she said quietly. For the first time since she arrived, her voice sounded calm. The driver nodded slowly. He promised that things would be different now. He would make sure the back row was no longer a place where anyone felt afraid. He would pay attention. He would listen. Inside the bus, the mood began to change. The tension that once filled the space was fading. Students looked relieved, as if a heavy secret had finally been lifted. Karen stepped back slightly, looking once more at the last row. That seat had carried a lot of silent memories. But today, the truth had finally come forward. Closing parenthesis. The bus remained parked quietly at the side of the road as the morning sunlight grew brighter. The tension that once filled the air had slowly faded, replaced by something calmer, something more honest. The truth had finally been spoken, and now everyone stood in a moment of reflection. Karen looked inside the bus again, her eyes moving from one child to another. These were the same children she had once blamed, the same faces she had thought were hiding something from her. But now she saw fear, innocence, and relief. They were not her enemies. They were just kids who didn't know how to handle what they had seen. The driver stepped forward gently. "I'm sorry," he said sincerely. "I should have noticed. I should have paid more attention." Karen looked at him for a moment, then slowly nodded. "You didn't know," she replied quietly. "And I didn't know how to ask the right questions." For the first time since she had stepped onto the bus, her voice carried no anger. Only exhaustion and a mother's pain. Inside, a young girl stood up from her seat and spoke softly. "Will those boys come back?" she asked. The driver shook his head. "No, I'll make sure this bus stays safe for everyone. No one will be allowed to scare anyone again." The students seemed to relax at those words. Some sat back in their seats, others looked out the window, as if a storm had finally passed. The last row, once filled with whispers and hidden fear, now looked like any other part of the bus. Karen took a slow step closer to the door again. "My son used to like sitting at the back," she said, almost to herself. "He said it made him feel grown up." The driver didn't know what to say, but he understood. "Maybe one day," he said gently, "he'll feel safe enough to come back." Karen didn't answer right away. She just looked at the empty seat in the last row for a long moment. Then she gave a small nod. "I hope so," she whispered. She turned and began walking away from the bus, her steps slower than before. The anger that once brought her here was gone. In its place was something quieter, something more peaceful, and for the first time, it truly felt like the past was finally letting go. The bus doors closed gently as Karen stepped away, her figure slowly disappearing down the quiet street. Inside, the children watched through the windows in silence. No one spoke. No one laughed. It felt like everyone understood that something important had just happened. The driver stood still for a moment, his hand resting on the steering wheel. The morning route had been delayed, but it no longer mattered. What mattered was what they had faced together, and what they had finally understood. He turned the key slightly, and the bus began moving again. As they drove toward the school, the atmosphere inside felt completely different. The heavy tension that once filled the space was gone. In its place was a calm quiet, like the bus itself could finally breathe again. Students began talking softly, not about fear, but about normal things again. Homework, friends, lunch. The last row remained empty. But this time, it didn't feel strange. It felt respectful, a small reminder of what had happened. Later that day, as the afternoon sun warmed the streets, the bus returned for the ride home. Children climbed aboard, their energy slowly returning. The driver checked the mirror, not out of fear, but out of habit. Everything looked peaceful. Then, at one of the stops, something unexpected happened. A woman stood there, Karen, but she wasn't angry this time. Beside her stood a young boy, holding her hand tightly. He looked nervous, but curious. The driver immediately recognized him from the photo Karen had shown earlier. It was her son. The bus door opened. Karen gently leaned down and spoke to him. "You don't have to if you're not ready," she said softly. The boy looked at the bus. Then at the other children watching from inside. A few smiled at him. One boy from the back gave a small wave. Slowly, he stepped forward. Karen's eyes filled with emotion as she watched him climb onto the bus. He walked down the aisle carefully, looking around, taking in every seat, every face. When he reached the middle, he paused. Then he kept walking all the way to the back row, and sat down. Not in fear, but in courage, and in that quiet moment, the final showdown truly came to an end.
Welcome to Karen Universe, where we dive into every wild, quirky, and intriguing story out there. Imagine that same bus returning, but this time the final showdown is it when Karen steps onto that lost seat. Well, the hidden truths finally come out. Now, this journey isn't just a ride, it's the path to the whole truth. If you enjoyed the, don't forget to subscribe to Karen Universe, share with your friends and drop your thoughts in the comments.